Welcome to Holy Ground Motherhood, a space for encouragement, reflection, and a reminder that the daily, ordinary work of motherhood is sacred and significant. I'm Julia Geiger, and each episode will explore the sacred in the messy, the holy in the mundane, and look for the Lord's work in the everyday moments of raising children. So take a breath, kick off your sandals, and let's walk together on this holy ground of motherhood. All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Holy Ground Motherhood. I am so excited for this episode. This is one that I have been looking forward to since I started dreaming about this podcast. It's someone who honestly has been my biggest cheerleader about this podcast, and I've let her into the process from the very beginning. She was going to be my first guest, but Kim kind of ended up coming in and swooping in, and she asked if she could be a guest, and just scheduling things worked out better that way. And then we kept trying to record, and it was like traveling and people getting sick and kids getting sick and just things not working out again and again. Even though we live together, it has taken us this long. But I think that there is something very beautiful and intentional about the fact that you are kind of coming in as the capstone, I guess, the ending of season 1 of the podcast. Yeah. So I'm glad that we are making it happen finally. So this is my mother, Joni Jones. She is one of my best friends. Like I said, she's one of my biggest cheerleaders. She's someone that I just go to constantly for, like, hey mom, I just need to brain dump for an hour. Can you just listen and let me process? I do that a lot, genuinely, because we are so similar and we think about things in a lot of the same way, and a lot of our personality is very similar. But she also has so much wisdom and love and grace to give, and I feel like a lot of the wisdom and hope that she has is very hard won. And so I'm really excited for you to hear her story of the ways that she had to fight for that hope and that grace in her life. So can you just give us a little bit of a snapshot to start out of who are you? What kind of season are you in right now? What kind of mother were you and are you? And kind of your relationship with your kids and your grandkids and all of that.
Okay. Currently, my season is that I work full-time, but I work remotely, which gives me some flexibility. I have been with the same company for 23 and a half years, long time. And I also have a part-time job that I work just a few hours a week. As you said, I live with you and your family, and so I get to see my 4-year-old and 18-month-old grandsons every day throughout the day, and it's just a joy. And then I have 2 more grandchildren who live here in town, and then I've got 4 more grandbabies who are just like a 6-hour drive south. I got married at 20. I had my first baby at 24. I have 4 kids, and I always knew, before my first one was born, I knew I was going to have Jimmy and then Janice and then Johnny and then Julia every 2 years, and that was the order they were going to come, and that I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. My first 2 babies were so easy, basically coming out, no, mother, at your convenience.
Johnny and I were less easy.
A little bit less.
A little more high maintenance. Yeah. I know that about myself.
Johnny, just the fact that, he came 2 months early.
No.
Starting out right out the gate. I loved being home with my kids, and I homeschooled. And I always said that I would homeschool as long as it was the best for them. I was not one who was like, nope, we're doing this no matter what, but as long as it's the best for them. And there did come a point when I felt like I could not do the best job for them. So I sent, my younger 2, you and your brother, to school, and we had some trial and error there, but it was always important to me that we have relationships. So I never wanted to just make a decision and that's what we're doing no matter what. I always wanted to kind of examine it, but relationship was important. I was raised in a home that there was always love, that we were always cared for, but it was not a physically or verbally affirming home. And with physical touch and closeness and words of affirmation being my top two love languages, sometimes that was hard. Sometimes I felt that lack, and I always wanted my kids to know that there was nothing they could do to make me stop loving them, but also that I just cared so deeply for them. I enjoyed them. I delighted in them. That was more important than following a set of predetermined plans.
So we did go through a pretty big shift in
Mm-hmm.
our childhood of what our family looked like. We'll talk about that in a little bit and kind of the health problems and everything that fed into that. But can you talk a little bit about what did early days of mothering look like? How did you know the kind of mother that you wanted to be? How did you know the kind of values that you wanted to have? And why was that important to you and how you were going to carry that out?
When I had my first, I just remember holding him and looking at him and being in awe of how amazing this is, an entire human. And even at a very young age, how babies are so curious and they are looking around. And I remember reading one time that babies are born looking for someone who will see them or be looking at them. I can't remember exactly how it's worded, but and I wanted to be that when they're looking for that one person. I wanted to be that for them. And I remember holding Jimmy and thinking, I don't want my last to feel like that got all used up.
Hmm.
And so I just remember being purposeful with each of my kids at each age to just be in awe of them, and the wonder of the creation that they are. When they say clever things, when they make jokes, when they learn something new, and they're so pleased with themselves, and you can see it even in babies when they figure something out and they clap for themselves. And I just think that that's so fun and it's so important, and I think that God does that with us. I think that he delights in us, and I think he's so pleased we when we do something well. And it's just it's fun. I had a friend who was in the grocery store. Her newborn was just screaming, and this old woman came up to her and said, well, just enjoy it now because this is as good as it gets. And I just remember thinking, that is so not true.
Gosh.
Every stage, it just gets better. Like it has, even now at your age, I'm still just thrilled watching you grow and learn things, and you come in and you go, oh, I just learned this thing, and it's so exciting. And I'm so excited. It's been easy to be your cheerleader because I'm I am confident that anything that you decide to do, you will figure out how to make it happen. And if there are things that you're genuinely wanting to pursue, then I know you can do it.
Along that vein, you have a story that is one of my favorite parenting stories that you've told me. It's just really inspirational and beautiful of when you learned that how you view your kids' capabilities and how you view them and how you think about them, and then kind of how that changes how you speak about them, how you parent them. Can you share that story and kind of how you learned all of that?
Yes. So Janice is my second. She was 2 or 3. She's little, and she was very carefree. And compared to Jimmy, my first, who was so serious about everything, and he would dig in and try to figure things out even at a very young age. I thought she seemed kind of ditzy compared to that, maybe. And I used to say, well, at least she's pretty. She'll have that, which, terrible. But
She is pretty.
she is pretty. She's beautiful. Anyway, I just remember God stopping me at one point and going, really? That's really that's really what you're setting her up for? That's the gift you have to give to her. And I stopped and I was like, okay, yeah, I repented. And I started speaking over her. She has the mind of Christ. She's created from the foundation of the earth to be blameless and pure before him. She's the apple of his eye. He delights in her. She can do all things through Christ who strengthens her. And it was within, I would say, a week, it was not very much time, that she came in the kitchen one day and she goes, Mommy, I know what 2 plus 3 equals is. And I said, You do? And she said, Huh? It's 5. And I said, Well, that's right. And she said, And I know what 5 plus 3 equals is. And I said, You do? And she said, It's 8. And I said, That's very good. And she did a few more. And I said, Janice, I said, who taught you this? Thinking maybe, I didn't know Jimmy. We weren't that far in his schooling. And she goes, My fingers. So she had taught herself math
Crazy.
at the age of 3. It made me realize that we can speak life and truth into our kids. And I'm not saying that it's a magic wand that you say, these words and your kids are going to be this, but it matters what we say and what we believe about our kids. There have been studies done about random group of kids given to this teacher and told, you were given this group of kids because they were the brightest in their classes. And they go on and, they excel. They get strong grades and all through their schooling, they excel. And then another random group of kids, you got these kids because, just get them to the next grade. They're not going to do well, but just do your best because, you're a good teacher. And they struggle for the rest of their schooling. And it matters what you think.
That's so beautiful. And like I said, that's like one of my favorite parenting nuggets that you have, because it just encourages me so much that what I believe about my children, mostly right now, my 4-year-old, because, Reese is still pretty much in the baby phase, but that Ezra, how I think about him changes the way that I parent him. And not in a, sweetie, you're the special snowflake of
Right.
you can do anything because you're special. Like, it's
Right.
like, hey, maybe this will be hard. And I feel like you've been this way with me so much. I talk about, like, with this podcast, you've been such a cheerleader for me. You don't put up this, like, you can do this because you're inherently special, but it's, you can do this because I believe in your ability to persevere. You've always encouraged us as kids to work really hard at whatever we want. We could have the wildest dreams, and there was never, I cannot think of a single time, you or Dad, where you'd be like, well, that's going to be really hard, or like, are you sure? Like, do you even know how to do that? Or like, I think you're going to like really struggle with that, or whatever. Like, the first thing was always like, I believe that you can, and maybe there would be a conversation of like, you're going to have to work really hard to get there. But the first reaction was always support. And like, I am going to be behind you this whole way. If this is what you want to go after, maybe it'll be a fight the whole time, but I'm behind you every step of the way. And I believe that you can do it.
And it was never a formula for me. It was always, okay, yeah, if this is what you're passionate about, let's make this happen. Knowing this may never happen, knowing this might be really hard, knowing this might actually be the doorway to something else. It was always another delight to see what your passions might be and where they might lead you.
It's funny, even, that you talk about like with Janice, like, oh, well, at least she's pretty, because she's like so brilliant. Like, so that's like, it's funny to think of that like somebody at some point could have thought that like she'd just be a pretty little girl and that's it, but she's so smart. She's so brilliant. And really, I feel like the 4 of us all have our things that like we excel in. And, a lot of that also, genetics, but also was because you instilled in us a love of reading and how you homeschooled us and all of that. So with the homeschooling, how did you adjust to kids being different and kind of knowing that you needed to adjust either how we were homeschooled or how we were parented or disciplined or whatever because of our personalities or how we responded to certain things?
Watching Jimmy and Janice, Johnny actually sort of almost forced it a little bit because he was born 2 months premature. He was so tiny. He was less than 5 pounds when he was born. He actually wore doll clothes because the preemie clothes were too big.
Cabbage Patch.
It was Cabbage Patch doll clothes. And I had to carry him from room to room because he would stop breathing. And so he was on a monitor, and if his breathing slowed down too much, the alarm would go off and it would startle him awake. So I kind of had to learn early that, well, even earlier with Janice, because she was sick when she was born. She had the strep virus. When she came home, Jimmy, I had just nursed. So with Janice, I just assumed I would nurse her the whole way. Well, she refused because she had had bottles in the nursery, and bottles are easier. And so one time I expressed milk into her mouth, and she was crying and crying until her mouth was full. And then she, turn her head and let it all spill out and then cry and cry. And I'd fill her mouth again. She just refused. I called the Leche League. The gal said, well, I've never said this before, but she wins. Give her a bottle. She needs some nutrition. Yeah. So even as babies, I kind of had to learn that they're different. There are different ways. And then as I was homeschooling, so some of that, I figured out that Janice was a night person. Jimmy was a morning person. So I kind of let them figure out their schedules, and you can kind of practice and
Experiment.
Yeah, experiment and adjust a little bit to see what works best with your kids. And what you figure out is that if you try to make each of them fit into a mold, then one of them may fit that mold and thrive, and then the others will just, where it takes this one 4 hours to get through school because of what time of day they started, it takes another one 8 hours to get through the same amount of work. And so just being aware, paying attention, having alone time with each of them as well, so that you can see how they're each doing.
You talked about how if you tried to do both of them, do school in the morning, Jimmy was thriving.
Yeah.
Janice was struggling.
Was miserable. Yeah.
But if you tried to do them both in the afternoon, it was like the opposite. Like Janice was doing great. Yeah. Jimmy could not get through it. How did you coordinate that?
I let Janice wake up when she woke up. I didn't wake her up. I just said, when you wake up and feel like coming downstairs, then you come downstairs. And it was, maybe between 10 and 11. And so her first meal would be lunch instead of breakfast. I also understand that would not have worked if she had been in the school system, right? Because school starts when it starts, and they don't just tell you to, come when you feel like it. Same thing with working, right? When they grow up and they get a job. But I feel like if we can pay attention and see what helps our children thrive when they're younger, then I think that just kind of gives them a little bit of a leg up, and then we can teach them how to adult in that, right? So this is how I function best. This is how the world works. And this is how I can kind of enter the world, and then they have the confidence to know that they're not lacking as people because they can't do what everybody else does. Right. But maybe they go into a different field of work that doesn't require them to start work at, 8 in the morning. With Joni, I'd have to have him get up and run around the house because he had so much more energy, and he wouldn't be able to focus. Yeah. He wasn't being naughty. He just couldn't focus on, and so he'd have to, run off some energy. And with you, sometimes you would have to get out your creative energy a little bit and take a break from what we were doing. And you used to design clothes, and you designed some of your own clothes. And we had a very good friend who would take your designs and make them.
Yeah, there were a few things that I wore in middle school that I had designed and that she had made for me. Yeah, that was so cool. Okay, so I do remember there being this kind of very stark shift in, our childhood. But it's funny because for me it was just all about what I experienced, but I'm sure for you there was a lot more lead up in your mind. And so can you talk a little bit about some of the mental health issues and maybe even before, kind of the everything changed moment? What kind of was starting to happen within you and in our family that you're like, oh, this is not sustainable?
I would say some of my early childhood memories are of being sad for no reason. And when you're young, you don't understand that there's perspectives. Different people have different things, and I just remember thinking, everybody's so good at hiding how they feel. I need to learn how to do that. And so I developed this great mask. I was raised in a home where if you don't talk about it, it's not real. But also, we didn't talk about mental health issues. And so feelings didn't matter. They just weren't they weren't important to talk about. So I got married, and I was young and didn't know how to express some of the things that I was feeling. He worked a lot, and so I was kind of on my own. We lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is where you were born. We lived in Tulsa for several years, and I had a group of friends that I could talk to. And when we moved to Colorado, I knew nobody but a couple of family members. So I was away from my village. I was away from my support group, and I was back into it's your mask is important. Appearances are important. I didn't know how to talk about these things, and at the time, your dad was not open to conversations about mental health, about depression or any of that.
And certainly not conversations about dealing with it with therapy or medication.
Right. And so the solutions were, well, if I would pray more, if I would read my Bible more, there was always this, if only I would more, then life would be better. And I tried. I tried, and then I just couldn't keep up with everything. I couldn't keep up with the house and being the wife and the mother and the homeschooling and all of the things. I just couldn't keep up. And because I didn't have any outlet for that, it just built and it festered and it got worse. And I finally went in and talked to a doctor, and I went on antidepressants. And it was interesting because we were going to a church, and I actually was removed from any position of leadership because of that. That was hard. So I just started shutting myself off from any of that. My depression got bad enough that I grew up Catholic, and they teach that if you commit suicide, then you don't get to go to heaven. And so I thought, as hard as my life was, hell might actually be worse. And so that's fine. That's what kept me from, making any permanent decisions in that. But I did go stay with my sister for about 6 months. It was hard at home. It's interesting. I was married for 20 years, and we never fought. And people go, "That's great." No, it's not. It just means you're not dealing with anything. Yeah. So,
because you've also mentioned you never talked about finances ever.
Nope, we never talked about finances, and the financial situation was not good.
When you left to go to California, did you know before you left that you were going to stay?
I was hoping that I could ask.
Because Joni and I were put into public school before you had left. Well, no, first we had that super weird, I don't know if it was a private school. I don't even remember how long we were at this school, but it was in the middle of the woods. It was a charter school. It was like in little cabins in the middle of the woods.
Yurts.
yurts,
Literally
little
yurts.
huts in the middle of the
Yeah.
woods, and
It was called the School in the Woods,
and it was like it was winter
in Black Forest.
and it was freezing outside, and like
Yeah.
I don't know if they were heated because I just remember it being so cold in these.
Well, you were always the size
I was
of a street urchin.
And then, you like realized they weren't actually teaching us anything. And remember you like asked me like, oh, do you want to go to Nate's school? And I was like, yeah, that sounds
That's
fun.
fun. That's a new thing.
That was my understanding of that. So, okay, so you were there for 6 months. You were seeing a counselor.
That's where I first started seeing a psychiatrist and a counselor. Finding a therapist is really hard.
It's exhausting.
It is exhausting. So when I got back, I found a psychiatrist. So he diagnosed me as bipolar, which I never had manic episodes. I just would get depressed and really depressed. He was good. He was very helpful. Like I said, I had a variety of counselors. Some were not very good. In all of this, it just gave up on my marriage. I didn't see how I could continue. And it was too hard to feel like I was never good enough. I was never measuring up. I was never. And so that was hard. I knew it was going to be hard on my kids. I knew I couldn't support you. So I moved in with my parents, and you guys stayed with your dad. I knew that I couldn't take care of myself. I knew I couldn't take care of 4 kids. And then over time, I got the help that I needed, and I got better.
You definitely did. There were some really hard years, and a lot of my, I think, teenage years of watching you make not good decisions, but also to your credit, like trying to make good decisions, and just really struggling with your mental health and struggling with, and then sometimes you'd make decisions that would like set you back, or choose certain relationships that would set you back. The amazing like redemptive power of our God is that when I think about the person that you were, when I was a kid or even as a teenager, and the relationship that we have now, that God did so much in you, but that you did the work too. And so are you willing to talk a little bit about, there was a season where you had kind of stepped away from your faith. And I think you probably would have said like you still believed, but you weren't really engaging with it. So what did that look like? And then what started to bring you back?
I think that feeling just so alone and abandoned, I started drawing away, being asked to step down from so many things. So then again, not having people. I mean, we are just made for community, right? And so I wasn't shunned or ostracized. That's very dramatic, but I felt it. I felt that separation. And
there was shame.
There was so much shame. And then feeling like it didn't seem to matter. I couldn't tell a difference in my life one way or the other. And so, yeah, I had a real crisis of my faith where I just wasn't sure what I believed. And when things actually got bad enough, I was on like the highest dose of bipolar meds and antidepressants and anti-anxiety and all of these different things. And my psychiatrist recommended electroconvulsive therapy, ECT treatments. You're completely sedated, and then they induce a seizure. And this was 3 times a week for weeks and weeks. And I just remember one time thinking, if I don't wake up, I'm not sure where I'm going to wake up. And that made me start thinking about it. A lot of people go through a deconstruction of their faith. Very few people take the time to reconstruct. So basically, I just said, okay, what do I believe? I believe that Jesus is Christ, the Son of the living God. Do I believe anything else? And just taking bit by bit by bit. That's what I did, was I slowly grew back into my faith.
We kind of had some hard years in our relationship,
Mhm.
especially when I was a teenager. And then when I was 17, so my junior and senior year, we got a house and we lived together.
Mhm.
And I do feel like that has always been the theme of our relationship, is even through our hardest times, you and I mean, obviously you've always sought relationship with your kids,
Mhm.
but I feel like you and I have always had this seeking each other
Mhm.
through, okay, even if it's like a
Mhm.
mess right now, we are going to pursue relationship. But I also think that there was a lot in our relationship that needed to happen in that
Mhm.
space. Similarly, after high school, I did a gap year program. I've talked about that here. And then after that gap year program, I started working at my family's business. And my uncle owns it, and my dad works there, and my mom works there.
Mhm.
And so I started working for her as her assistant, and we shared an office together. And I just remember, one, again, that being so key for just a lot of like the rebuilding of the health of our relationship.
Mhm.
And two, I got to witness you wrestle through your faith
Mhm.
and have a lot of like really hard questions. And I just remember like us having these very deep theological discussions, like while
Mhm.
we're doing
Sure.
payroll. That was just so cool for me to be able to witness and be a part of that journey
Mm.
for you, because I think that that ended up building my own faith and
Mhm.
how I viewed my own faith and how I saw God, and just seeing you wrestle with questions. Because I think my first reaction is like, it's not okay to have questions.
Right.
And in the episode that I'm going to release after this one, it's basically all about how the questions are actually holy and they actually are the
Mhm.
basis of our faith. But I think that that really started the beginning of
Mm.
that. And so after you kind of were going through that, I had moved here,
Mhm.
and you had started really, I think, pursuing, your faith, and you had started going to counseling again. And it was really cool because dad had also, I
Mhm.
mean, he did counseling for years and then
Mhm.
group therapy for years.
Mhm.
And it's such a testament to the redemptive power of God,
Mhm.
because like my parents today are not the same parents that I had when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like it's like different people.
Yeah.
And it's like I get to see how God is not finished with anyone.
Mhm.
And I also got to see the power of therapy. I just am like so pro therapy. If anytime
Mhm.
anyone says like I'm in therapy or I'm, thinking about it, I'm just like, that's awesome,
That's good. Yeah.
because I see it in my own parents, how y'all did the work
Yeah.
on yourselves so
Yeah.
much. And you and dad have always had like a very respectful relationship,
Mhm.
even as I'm sure you were dealing separately with a lot of pain. I feel like I would go through this just struggle as a kid where it felt like I had to hold one of you up on a pedestal. Like one of you
Sure.
had to be like up here and then the other one had to be demonized. And it was really hard for me to come to a place where I'm like, oh, look,
Yeah.
they're both
Right.
broken people who are trying their best and
Right.
ultimately are good parents. I feel like that was like a really big growing moment for me to be able to come to
Yeah.
that place of
Yeah.
like, neither of my parents are evil and neither
Yeah.
of them are perfect.
Right.
And
Right.
and that's okay. That's just life.
There was a verse that I held on to when things would get hard, or when I would just feel shame about having not been the perfect mom and made these mistakes. There's a scripture in Joel that talks about that the Lord will restore the years the locusts have eaten. And I've always hung on to that, because that doesn't mean that those years are uneaten. It just means that the Lord's going to restore things. I've always felt that closeness with you. I always felt like we have been friends for so long. And there were times things were hard, but you would be honest with me.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was painful and sometimes it was hard, but it was good. When I would come out to visit, I would feel different. I think for my mental health, this was a healthier place for me. And I don't know if this was a healthier place or if not there was a healthier place. But when I would come visit, it was like a physical lightning release. And so it's funny because when we were all talking about it one time, you kids were all in town, and including Nick, And we were talking about me moving there, and everybody was like, "Yeah, you should." And I was like, "Oh, I'd have to start over again." And Jimmy made a comment about, "Listen, with your personality and your skills, you're not going to be the new guy for very long." And Nick's one comment with you privately was, I mean, she's not going to just like be over at the house all the time, is she? Which is hilarious because
you're over at the house.
because he was the one who invited me to come over here.
Yeah.
Literally in your house.
It was so special to me to see your relationship with my boys, even just in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Of being able to see, and I feel like this is part of like God's redemptive power,
Yeah.
of just seeing you pour into them, being able to see you be this incredible grandma to my boys, and being able to see you operate in these gifts that you have, because you are such a great mom, and you are so like naturally bent towards that like the locust had eaten so many of those years that could just be a wash of, I had this incredible gift in this area, and it got cut short. But then God, it's like he is so good and so powerful, and he gives it back, and he says like, here's more years.
Yeah.
And I get to witness that in
Yeah.
you as a mom and as a grandma.
Yeah. I am so much healthier and so much more able to appreciate the gift that it is that I can pour into you still, and into the boys, into my other kids and grandkids, because the decisions that I made out of my pain or lack of knowledge or whatever it was, but the decisions, they don't discount me from this life, right? They didn't make it so that, well, you blew that, you don't get to be mom anymore, you don't get to be influencing these kids, you don't get to. No, it says you're good at this. And I can put a baby to sleep. Plus I have the perspective of, I know that difficult stages don't last forever. And so I don't get as stressed. I think that's part of the gift of grandparenting.
Yeah, I just remember like going on a walk and telling you like, you've just got stores of treasures in heaven because of how you showed up for me. And honestly, again with Reese, where she lived with us for 4 weeks both times. And you would take like night duty a lot of times, or like I would, nurse, or like with Ezra, we kind of did things with bottles for a little bit. I talked about my postpartum depression and how it was kind of crazy how bad it was with all the support that I had. Like I had an incredible support, and so I'm like, if I had less support than I don't know. I don't know that we would have made it. I was doing so much better with Reese, and I was able to enjoy that season with him more. And so then I was also able to like appreciate your spot better. A lot of things went easier with Reese. Nursing went better, like just a lot of things. And I remember I would go and I would get Reese, and it's like I would nurse him and then he would take like a while to put back down. So I would nurse him and then I would go to you and I'd hand him to you and you would rock him back down and I'd go back to sleep.
I don't get as stressed because I know, they're not going to be screaming forever. And as the mom, as the grandma, our job is not to just be so focused on the behavior, but it's to figure out the heart. What's going on with the heart? People always talk, well, I just want my kids to be happy. Well, then you're surrounded by selfish little hedonists, and that is not really what you want. I want my kids' hearts to be whole, right? I tell the story about Jimmy, and I had told him to do something, and he kind of, little face, and I said, "Oh." So we went in the other room and had a conversation about it. And I was with a bunch of friends at the time, and my friends were like, "What was that?" And I said, "Oh, well, he, kind of pitched a fit, and so I wanted to deal with it right away." And my friends were like, "Oh my gosh, that is not a fit. You want to see a fit? Let me show you a fit." I said, No. A fit is not what's happening with this little body right here. A fit is what's happening in here. And if his is the same as your kid throwing himself on the ground and kicking and screaming, both things are happening in the heart. And that's what God has given us. is we are the molder of hearts.
It's
So
so beautiful.
yeah.
It's so beautiful. There's a million and a half things I want to talk to you about, and I feel like we could talk all day, but we do have to wrap up because, nap time is going to end at some
Yes.
point. But it's a good encouragement to us that you're going to be on this podcast more than once.
Yes,
I just know
good.
it because there are there's so many more stories and things that I know I want to talk to you about, but I did really love getting that, 20,000-foot view
Yeah.
of who you were as a mom. So I do have these questions that I ask every guest
Okay.
at the end of the podcast. So I do want to hear your thoughts on these. Okay.
Okay.
Number one, when you look back, where do you see Jesus most clearly in the everyday, ordinary moments of motherhood?
He spoke to me, and I can tell a story about you. I was in the back of the house, and I was folding laundry. I don't even remember. And he clearly said, "Julia, now." And I went running. I had no idea. I went running to the other end of the house, and you were leaning over the kitchen stove, and somehow you were two at the most, and you had climbed up on a chair. You were at the kitchen stove, somehow had managed to turn it on, and that cardboard egg carton had just caught fire as you were reaching for it. And so there are a lot of stories that I can tell about God stopping me with Janice. Watch what you're saying. I learned to respond to that voice. And so, and those are, to me, those are everyday moments because you're just going along, and this is where life can just turn on a dime. And so learning to listen to him about my kids.
How would you encourage a mom to build her own village or support system if she feels like she has none? You definitely relate to that.
I do. This is very important. The more we spend time alone, the easier it is for us to spend time alone. And so, even if you're an introvert, I believe you're still made for community. If you have a church group, if you have a neighbor, if you have anybody that you feel a connection with, being brave enough to say, would you like to go for a walk? Would you like to get coffee? Would you like to? And just having that conversation, and then seeing if there are more people you can bring into that, because having Tony has been a member of my village for 40 years. Yeah. And there are certain people that will come and go. There are certain people that will just be there forever. Being brave enough to say, will you be my friend? Not in those words, but yeah.
Is there a verse or passage of scripture that has been significant in your journey of motherhood?
Yes, I would say that there are two of them. One is in Romans, and it says that Abraham faced the fact that his body was as good as dead and that Sarah was too old to have a baby. But he did not waver in unbelief, knew that God was faithful and could do what he had promised. And to me, the important point in that is he faced the facts. And it could be part of my generation where, well, if you don't talk about it, or we don't speak death by saying I have a headache, No, he faced the facts, but he didn't waver in unbelief. And he knew that God was faithful and would do what he had promised. And we have a whole book of promises from him. And then the other one is in 2 Corinthians 1:3, and it says that God comforts us and that we are to comfort others with the comfort that we've received from God, which means to me that anything that you come through, you with your postpartum depression, me with my depression, or all of my 62 years of things that I have come through, anything that I have come through, then that becomes my ministry. My story is not my own, that I have a responsibility to share it.
We could cover so much more, and we will definitely, but I do really appreciate just your vulnerability and you're willing to share and even, open up about some things that I know are hard and, are painful, but to do it so that maybe somebody else could be encouraged by it and could feel seen in that. And so I just really appreciate all your wisdom and your love, and I just love you so much, and I'm so grateful for you, and I'm really glad that you're my mom.
I love it. I love being your mom.
So thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Holy Ground Motherhood podcast. My prayer is that you leave this conversation reminded that God is with you, even here, even now, in the middle of your ordinary moments. If this episode encouraged you, I'd love for you to share it with another mom who might need that same reminder. If you want to dig a little deeper, you can find scripture references as well as links to my Instagram page and YouTube channel in the show notes. Until next time, may you find holy ground right where your feet are.